Here on our 2.5 acres that we affectionately call the cottage, we're passionate about our land, what we grow, and enjoying that goodness. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dry Farm Wines for sponsoring today's episode. I love on my land by cultivating flowers and vegetables, but the farmers from Dry Farm Wines do it with grapes. I've exclusively stocked my wine cabinet with Dry Farm Wines for over 3 years now, and with good reason. I care about enjoying clean, naturally fermented, low sugar, low alcohol wines that are free of additives, synthetic ingredients, and artificial colorings. Their growers farm with respect for nature, focusing on biodiversity and healthy soils and regenerative practice. And one of my favorite parts is that their wines taste incredibly unique. They're lively, refreshing, and pure because they are alive with natural fermentation. This is like the sourdough bread of the wine world. Dry Farm Wines has given me a special offer to share with Elliott Homestead viewers to get an extra bottle with your first order for just a penny. So you can visit dryfarmwines.com/Shay Elliott, place your first order for whatever amount of wine you would like, and you will get an extra bottle for just a penny just for being an Elliott Homestead viewer. dryfarmwines.com/Shay Elliott. Even though it's still January here on the farm, there is a lot to do to think about this year's coming gardens. Spring will be here before we know it. And what that means, at least for me, is it's time to sit down with a good glass of wine. And it's time to sit down with my tried and true cottage gardening books. We had so much fun having a little discussion over the table with you last week that we thought we would do it again. But this time we're going to talk about flowers. I get asked a lot where we draw inspiration from for our cottage gardens. We have a very particular English style, which I'm just drawn to. There are so many different types of gardens. Yours won't look like mine, and mine won't look like yours. And that's the way it should be. Your garden should be personal to you. So while I don't draw everything out of these books, I pick and choose the things that speak to my heart, the things that I want to see in my gardens. And ultimately, that's what makes this space so special. So I wanted to share with you these books that have been with me for a long time, that I keep going back to time and time again because of what they offer the flower gardener. The first, and probably the king of all gardening books, is The Complete Gardener by Monty Don. Now, if you listen to my podcast, Homemaker Chic, you know how I feel about Monty Don. I love him. He has pushed me as a gardener in ways he'll never know, but that have changed how our gardens are laid out and how they function in such a big way. So The Complete Gardener is not so much on design. It doesn't have that traditional cottage garden feel necessarily, but it really helps you learn how to take care of plants and what you should be doing seasonally in your garden. Things like setting up new gardens or dealing with your compost or creating pathways or structuring things so that it looks good seasonally. This is a great resource for you if you're actually wondering, how do I take care of these things and how ultimately do I set up a garden? The Complete Gardener is a great resource for that. I'll try to link all of these below in the show notes if you want to check them out, but some of them have been out of print for a while, and so they might be a little bit difficult to get your hands on. I'm sure you can find them though if you're eager enough. This is another one. I picked it up years and years ago. You can tell it's very well loved. And it was written by an author who originally learned to garden in Ireland and then moved to Arizona. So he has explored all different types of gardening, and he talks about all of those experiences in this book. I feel like visually, this one hits on a lot of what we're trying to establish in our cottage gardens. So this one's called Pleasures of the Cottage Garden, and it's by Robert Lee, I believe. Rand Lee, had that wrong. Rand Lee, this is a great one. It was published, I think, like maybe in the early 90s, so it's been out for a while. I always love to see the dated photographs in these books because you can definitely tell that they were published a while ago. This is one I picked up just a few years ago. It's called 100 English Gardens, and I don't draw quite the inspiration from this one just in the way it's laid out, but I find a lot of flowers from this one where I'm like, I want to try that variety or I want to try that variety. That's why I always sit down with a pen and a paper when I look through these books because something always pops up that I think, oh man, I need to see if I can find a variety of that. So this is a really great one to look at. It also has some really good structural ideas. If Monty Don is the king of my gardens, then Tasha Tudor is certainly the queen. This was one of the first cottage gardening books that I got years ago. And my most favorite thing about Tasha's gardens is how she's able to put her life's work into these gardens, and yet they look like they just came out of the soil. Like somehow magically all of these gardens just appear and they look this good all the time. And obviously that's not true. Tasha Tudor poured so much work into her gardens while she was alive. But if I'm going to emulate anybody's style, it's definitely hers. It just speaks to me. Now she's in Vermont, so she's in a little bit of a different zone and a little few different things grow there. But on the whole, this is where I take so much from. It's probably my favorite. Okay, here's another good one that's so loved. It's lost its dust jacket over the years. This one's called English Cottage Gardening, and I don't know who it's by. Maybe it doesn't matter. Tasha Tudor actually does a little excerpt about Corgi Cottage in here. But this one hits it on point for me. I probably reference this one other than Tasha Tudor's more than any other book. This is the one where I'll get whole ideas like, okay, I want pink roses in the background and I want purple salvia coming up this way and blue delphinium up this way. And here's what I want for my ground cover. So there are whole gardens in here that I've tried to emulate. Again, the photography is a little bit dated, but so what? What is old has value, right? And then lastly is The Layered Garden by David Culp. This is the newest one to my cottage gardening coffee table book addiction. David Culp's gardening style is not exactly mine. It's just different. Everybody has their own styles. But what I value about what he says is about making sure that your garden looks good for 4 seasons. And so what is going to be blooming in the spring and what's going to be blooming in the summer and what structures do you have in place so that the garden looks good through fall and through winter. And I love that challenge. David has challenged me to grow as a gardener because I'm not just thinking, hey, this will look really good when the roses bloom. It's like, well, what about when the roses aren't blooming and what's going to make your garden beautiful then? And so it's really valuable. It's definitely pushed me as a gardener. So this one has earned its place for keeps. So once all the design inspiration has been drawn and once I've listed out what I want to try or new gardens I want to develop around the property this year, then we move on to the garden dream board. So if you are creating a garden this year, or even if you already have a lot of established beds, I would encourage you to make a garden dream board. What I mean when I talk about a garden dream board is getting a big poster board. And you can either just draw it up from memory or you can just get a Google Earth image or get a drone shot, but find a way to get a bird's eye view of your property. And then you can outline your gardens and you can see it in just a different perspective. Once that structure is in place, you can kind of get a balance. You can feel the balance of your property. Like maybe you need to develop a bed over here. Maybe this one needs to be a little smaller and you need a pathway. This is a great time of year to be thinking about those things in the garden. And then once that's done, the really fun things start because this is when we get to start piecing in the flowers and the plants that we'll bring in this year to make sure visually that they work in our spaces. But before we totally get there, let's talk about building layers into our garden. So I like to think about my garden in maybe 3 levels, maybe 4 or 5, but let's start with 3. The first is the layer of evergreens. So these are things like ivy or juniper, things that stay green year round that add that interest to your garden even when things aren't blooming in the wintertime. And that's why it's so crucial is because you don't want your garden to just be a totally blank space for 6 months of the year. You want it to have some sort of interest. So we do this with things like maybe interesting fencing or nice gravel pathways or maybe some rock formations or ponds. Another way we can do this with plants is with evergreens because those are going to add interest. And a lot of times evergreens like junipers, those are going to be your big statement pieces. And so you want to sort of say, I'm going to stick one of those giant tall junipers right here because that's going to serve as your backdrop and something to work off with your flowers. The next layer that we add into our gardens are perennials. So these are plants that you only have to plant one time And then if you take good care of them, they'll come back year after year after year, many of them growing so vigorously that you can divide them and transplant them to new parts of your garden. So these are, something that tend to be a little bit more expensive. And so what I do is just sort of layer them in little by little each year. And then eventually you end up with these really full flower beds. But some perennials you just need to be a little bit patient with. So once the evergreens are in place, then I think about the perennials. And the last layer is annuals. These are flowers that you are going to plant every year from seed. The two easiest ones that I can think of that I plant every year are zinnias and cosmos. These are both dead simple to start from seed right in your garden. And you think of them like the fireworks of your garden. They're going to give you that big bang in the middle of summer, tons of color, super fast growth. But then when the frost comes, they die back and you got to do it again the next year. Even though it takes a little bit more work to start these from seed, they're really valuable for all the color and flash that they add to the garden. And then, okay, let's sneak off to layer 4 a little bit. This is where you can add in elements that make your garden yours. So whether this is a rusty old bucket that you want to put some succulents in, or maybe it's an old vintage bench that you're going to sort of nestle into a little bit of a rose bed. These are the things that make it yours. So think, what personal element do I want to add to this space that makes it feel comfortable and unique to me? Those can be the distinguishing elements that make you love your garden space versus just liking it. Okay, let's talk about where we source all of these beautiful flowers from. One of my rituals every year is sitting down with my Bluestone Perennials magazine. This is a company that I've used for years to order perennials from. I've been very impressed with their quality. Now, a few things you should know about Bluestone. They come in little biodegradable pots so that you actually just plant the pot into the ground, which is great. It helps plants that would otherwise suffer from transplant shock. But they come in little 4x4 containers. And a lot of times you'll see the price and you'll think, oh, well, I can get that at Lowe's for $7. And that's probably true. But the reason that I continually order from Bluestone is that they have varieties of things that you won't see anywhere else. So Lowe's has some really good options in terms of maybe hosta varieties or evergreens. But what you'll find in magazines like Bluestone is all different kinds of hardy geranium and all different kinds of lupin and delphinium and mosses that you just won't find in your kind of bigger box stores. Now, maybe you live near an amazing nursery, and if so, I'm jealous. We don't. And so mail order is really the only way that we can get unique varieties that fit the color scheme of our garden. And let's talk about that real quick. When we first came in to our gardens, I planted reds and bright yellows and oranges and pinks and all these colors that made no sense together. And since then, we've ripped out what we don't like and we've replanted it all in these softer tones that are really traditional of a cottage garden. So not necessarily pastels, but tones like burgundies instead of bright reds, or apricots, blues, different shades of pinks and purples. These are all welcome in my garden and I love them, and I love the mashed up, relaxed feeling of them all working together. I bring in white very little, although I do have some white peonies that I absolutely love. But for the most part, we just sort of stick into that softer colors of the traditional cottage garden, and that works really well for our space. Which brings up one more little note here in our conversation. If you don't love it in your garden, rip it out, because you want to love your garden. And there are flowers that are strikingly beautiful, but not right for your space. And there is nothing wrong with digging it out and giving it to a friend or throwing it in a compost pile and just giving it thanks for its little contributions to your garden and moving on. So what I like to do when I sit down with my perennial catalog is just circle all the varieties that I know I need, or that I've ordered before that I need more of, or new things I'd like to try. And I'll do this 2 or 3 or 4 times. I'll sit down with the same catalog because every time I'm looking for something a little bit different. And I don't want anything to slip through the cracks. After that's done, I go online and I build my online order. And then I cross-check it with what I've circled to make sure that I actually really love what I'm going to order, because I don't want to waste money on plants that I don't absolutely love. And I know if I've picked it out twice, I must really love it. So then after that, it gets ordered. So Bluestone is where I typically order all of my perennials from. But there are other flowers that we bring in too that don't come from here. Some of our flowers we will get from friends' gardens or cuttings or transplants off of things that they have, things like lady's mantle, transplant really well. But other flowers like dahlia tubers, for example, we get from a company this year, from Eden Brothers, which is a great online company that you can get dahlia tubers from. And I also got a few annual flower seeds from them, some zinnias and some cosmos and some bells of Ireland, some Johnny jump ups, a few seeds like that. Johnny's Seeds has a lot of flower seeds as well, so we got some more zinnias and some more cosmos from them. So it's kind of picking from all these different places, which is great because you really can pick the best of what you want and bring all that into your garden. So once you've picked out your dahlia tubers and your annual flower seeds and your perennial flowers, this is where the garden dream board comes into place, because this is where we have the big poster in front of us. And what I actually do is print out little pictures of all the flowers that I want to order, and I cut them out into little squares, and I'll actually tape them onto the garden dream board. And the reason that I do this is because you will save so much time and so much money by saying, yes, I love the way that rose works with that clover, or, you know, this doesn't quite work there, or with this color, or with this shade that we have here, so we're gonna move it over here. So you think about it one time, you get it all in place. Yes, I like the colors. Yes, I like the textures. Yes, that works together. And then when your order comes and you're super overwhelmed because it's springtime, you already know exactly where everything is going to be planted and you don't have to think about it again. So it's one of those things, it's a way to be in the garden and to feel that connection with it at this time of year when there's really not a lot to be done out there, not until things warm up in the spring. This is a great time to plan, to dream, to create a vision for your space and for your garden, and then to sit back and wait and have an organized plan for when things start to arrive in the mail in a few weeks' time.